Very mild-mannered man here is Edward Theodore Gein. He would go down in history as one of America's most macabre serial killers, and that's what we're talking about today on Thought Crime, on Keto and Krime, and the Keto Comic. What I would like to tell you is that this episode will contain graphic explanations and descriptions of Gein's crimes, as well as there will be some quite unsavory pictures, as well as some very off-color, inappropriate jokes cracked by yours truly, because I couldn't get through this case without cracking a few jokes. So I apologize up front to everyone. If you have a sensitive stomach or that's just not for you, then I highly advise skipping this episode. But if you want to learn more about this fascinating case, then stay tuned. Here we go. Everyone, welcome to Thought Crime and Podcast World, Keto and Krime on YouTube, and the Keto Comic on BitChute. This one is unusual, gory, scary, everything that a horror movie is built on. And as a horror nut, I can tell you I was very excited about this case because this gentleman we're about to talk about is the real life inspiration for some of horror genre's most heinous villains, including Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Norman Bates from Psycho, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and his macabre museum of dead body artwork was also the inspiration for Rob Zombie's setting in House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. So let's get into it. For those of you watching via video, as you can see here, to your left is kind of a collage of different villains. Well, down there in the left-hand corner is that very unassuming gentleman is Edward Theodore Gein, who we are talking about today. Let's get into it. Edward Theodore Gein was born August 27th, 1906 in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. He was the younger son of George and Augusta Gein. He had an older brother named Henry, who was born in 1904. The Geins, by all accounts, were your basic Wisconsin Midwestern type of couple. For a few years, George owned a grocery store near La Crosse, the town of La Crosse, but after a few years and prompting by his very domineering wife, Augusta, he sold that and they relocated to a farm on the outskirts of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Now, Plainfield's just Plainfield. Plainfield is a very small town, not a whole lot of notoriety. If you drove through it, you might miss it if you blinked. And so, not the type of place you would expect these types of incidents to occur. Just very middle of the road, good Christian, Midwestern values type of small town where the men like to hunt and the women like to sew. And it was, especially in the early 1900s, that's just the way it was. They actually relocated to a 155-acre farm. For those of you on video pictured here, this is the Gein farm, circa about 1915. And that's where they lived. They lived in almost complete isolation. In fact, they made their money from raising crops and livestock on the farm, selling it. And also, George took on odd jobs, as did his two sons, to help support the family, because Augusta, who was very much the matriarch of this family, had an idea that the world was evil, it was full of pestilence, and it was not a good place for her family. So she basically preached isolationism, and that's what they did. They were completely isolated from the rest of the town. Augusta had been raised a fundamentalist Lutheran, which, if you know anything about Lutheran, it was the first Protestant denomination to split off from Catholicism. Still held on to some of the tenets of Catholicism, but kind of threw away the rules it didn't really think were good. And she followed the very, fire and brimstone teachings that Lutheranism kind of puts forward. Among that was a heavy emphasis on both the Old Testament, the the rules of the Old Testament, the old Jewish laws, which advocated for things like stoning and, you know, things like that, as well as the book of Revelation, which talked about the end of days. So she was always looking for the end of days. She always preached this to her children and her husband, and basically made them live this forced, pristine, godly lifestyle, which was absolutely no luxuries. There wasn't electricity in the farm until much, much later. Things of that nature. They kind of led a hand-to-mouth existence away from everyone else. One of the things that she taught, especially her sons, were that women, except for her, were evil, dirty, conniving, and just the doorway to the devil. So Henry and Ed grew up hearing this over and over again, as well as being isolated from everybody else except to go to school, which they only went to school until the 7th grade, in which Augusta forced them to quit and return to the farm. They didn't have a whole lot of exposure to women outside of their mother, so they both learned to regard their mother as almost a god, or at least out of fear they perceived to regard her as a god or a goddess at some point. Young Ed and Augusta, his mother, are pictured here for those of you on video here. As you can see, Augusta looks like a very assuming, what I would call a Pentecostal granny, even though she wasn't Pentecostal, but this could be a picture of any of my grandmothers and great aunts that I've seen from the past. This could be them, so it's kind of scary. And this is young Ed below. He was noted until, like I said, they quit school in 7th grade. And both Henry and Ed did well in school, especially Ed. Ed loved to read. He was an avid reader. His teachers did say he would read anything he could get his hands on, which led them to believe he might be of an above average IQ, even though later IQ testing, when after his arrest, proved that he was of average intelligence, nothing genius level there. But he did have a voracious appetite for books, newspapers, whatever he could get his hands on. I'm gonna gather that it's probably a symptom of being isolated like he was. He just wanted to know more. All he knew was what his mother told him was in the Bible, so he really didn't know. He wanted to find out more, and I think that's why he read. But ultimately he gave in to his mother and was completely under her thumb, as was his brother Henry and father George. His teachers and classmates noted that Ed had very strange mannerisms the entire time he was in school. He seemed very effeminate, very weak. He acted like a girl in a lot of ways. And he had a habit of laughing at nothing. Like they would just be in class, and all of a sudden Ed would start to laugh as if he had just told a joke in his own head. I mean, he sounds like any number of stand-up comedians I know that like to laugh at their own shit. That could definitely be Ed Gein. But, yeah, he thought he was funny in his own head, evidently. And probably the result of me being an introvert myself, probably the result of him having to live in his own head because of the domineering aspects of his mom. He would probably carry on full conversations in his head and then laugh at someone's jokes. I mean, get your kicks how you can get them, I guess. But things went on pretty well up until Ed was in the 6th grade. When he told his teachers that his mom said that he would only have one more year of school and then he was going to come back and learn how to operate the family farm. And indeed, his 7th grade year, he and Henry were both withdrawn from school. Henry was in 9th grade by that time. And they were taken out of school, which in the early 1900s, there really wasn't a thing called truancy because most people were farmers, especially in the Midwest, and lots of times they needed their children to help sustain the family. So school wasn't as important as it is now. So they were taken out of school and basically moved back to isolation on the farm, where their only schooling was the preaching that their mother gave them from the Old Testament rules and regulations, as well as the book of Revelation. April 1st, 1940, Ed's father, George, died of heart failure caused by his alcoholism. I don't even have to venture a guess as to why he was an alcoholic. I think that's kind of obvious that he was under the thumb of a very domineering religious fanatic wife, and probably found his alcohol to be quite soothing. So unfortunately, it aggravated an underlying heart problem, and he died of a heart attack April 1st, 1940. From this time on, both Henry and Ed had to pitch in double time, working not only their farm, but taking odd jobs to help make ends meet. Augusta pretty much stayed in the house, did nothing except cook and clean a little bit. So these guys were the face of the family. They did everything they could to keep the family afloat. Ed was still reading anything he could get his hands on. He had to keep a lot of stuff hidden from Augusta, because if he was reading anything outside of the Bible, it was considered evil. So he had to basically sneak around and read things. He had a love for detective magazines and books about Nazi atrocities in the World War II, which kind of makes me think I need to change my hobbies. But he read a lot about the macabre. Let's just put it that way. He, I guess, escaped. Maybe in his own mind, to me, he was fantasizing about doing stuff to his mom. Who knows? But he had some strange hobbies for a young man. But believe it or not, Ed was a well sought after babysitter in town. A lot of the odd jobs he did were babysitting for people, and they loved him. He had get along great with the kids. He played with them. He read to them, appropriate books. And I think later on, psychologists would say that that was perhaps a manifestation that his mind never really evolved past a certain level, that he didn't trust adults, therefore he felt more comfortable in the company of children. So that's how it was. Henry and Ed working odd jobs, working the farm to keep the family afloat, completely isolated from everyone. They had literally had very limited contact with women outside of their mother, except for a teacher or two, their entire life. Henry, though, began dating. Very contrary to his mom's teachings and mom's wants, he began dating a single mom, a divorced mom, with 2 children. Well, this is just the pathway to the devil. And Augusta came down very hard on Henry. And Henry was in the process of moving out of the family farm into the home with his new girlfriend. He wanted completely away from Augusta. It's like he had been, red-pilled, for lack of a better term, that his eyes had been opened up to the evil that his mother was preaching, and he wanted nothing to do with it. Though he still felt an obligation to help with the family farm and send them money. He did. He still worked with his brother on a daily basis, but he would start to try to break Augusta's hold on Ed as well. He started speaking very ill of Augusta around Ed, saying that what she says wasn't necessarily true. Not all women are bad. It's natural for men and women to want to be together. These are not things you should be ashamed of. These are things you should embrace. And Ed, by all accounts, horrified. He didn't really argue with his brother. He just remained silent and didn't really acknowledge what his brother was saying. May 16th, 1944, the brothers were doing a controlled burn of some marsh grass at the end of the 156 acres of their family farm to kind of clear for crops the next year, and the fire got out of control. According to police and fire department accounts, Ed said he lost view of his brother Henry. He ran and got help with the local fire department. The fire department and the police converged on the farm. They said, ironically, Ed was able to lead them exactly to his brother Henry's body, which they found face down in some marsh grass, completely dead. Of course he's completely dead. Dead of aspiration from smoke inhalation. Ed said that he had lost view of Henry during fighting the fire, and that he decided just to go get help instead of trying to find his brother. It did raise a few eyebrows, again, how he was able to lead them straight to his brother's body, but no foul play was ever insinuated. They simply wrote it up as death from smoke inhalation, and case closed. Although later on, one of the many biographers of Ed Gein would say that in later police interrogations and upon further examination of autopsy records, it was noted that Henry had bruising to the back of his head. Now, whether that meant Ed had taken the Old Testament story of Cain and Abel, which his mother had told them 100 times, to heart and killed his brother and then covered it up with the fire, we don't know. He was never charged or implicated in the murder of his brother. It was written up as an accidental death. Draw your own conclusions. We'll probably never know. I just want to give you all the facts here that his brother did have bruises on the back of his head as if he had been struck. So now Ed was literally alone with what would be construed as the love of his life, his mom. Now, I want you guys to know full up, there have never been any accusations, any evidence that there was an incestual relationship between Ed and his mom, or his mom and his brother, any of that stuff. That has never been proven, never been ascertained, but people that knew Ed Gein said he spoke of his mother as if she was a wife or a lover rather than his mother.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
How he adored her and respected her and worshipped her. So, draw your own conclusions. But Augusta didn't take well to both her son Henry's leaving for another woman, as well as dying. So she began to decline in health. She had one major stroke that made her basically an invalid, which Ed took care of her. He brought her room downstairs. He took care of her. He kept her house pristine, as well as working and supporting the family. He dove even deeper into his obsession with crime novels and tales of Nazi history. And he took care of his mom. But finally, his mom did pass away December 29th, 1945, from another major stroke. And here, if you're in video, you see the graves of Henry Gein and Augusta Gein. After the death of his mom, Ed became even more isolated at the farm. He only did odd jobs that he needed to sustain himself. He sold off some of the acreage that had belonged to his brother Henry. He sold off a lot of the normal farming supplies, quit raising livestock, quit farming. So he kind of sustained himself to the bare minimum doing odd jobs. He basically closed off portions of the house that his mom had used. He closed off the entire upstairs because that's where her bedroom had been for most of his growing up. He closed off the sitting room, the parlor, the living room, all the places that his mom had frequented, and basically lived in the kitchen and a small room off the kitchen, which he turned into a small makeshift bedroom. These areas became very filthy, very unkempt, while the rest of the house he maintained that had been closed off were maintained in a pristine condition. Everything that his mom held at value at that house was kept clean, in good repair, and in pristine condition, whereas his area of the house where he actually lived became basically a living junk pile, if you can imagine. He also, when he wasn't working, the few hours a week he worked to sustain himself, he basically read crime novels, he read thrillers, he read everything about the macabre that he could ingest. Along about this time, he started carrying out a fascination with corpses and dead bodies. He started skulking around town, kind of seeing when people had died and seeing when their funerals and their funeral processions would be. He actually started going to it was noted in interviews later on that he made over 40 trips to the local graveyard where he would dig up freshly buried corpses and take body parts from them, as well as skin them like you would a deer and make macabre works of art out of their skin. Among some of the things he created was a mammary suit, that was coined by the people that found it. It was basically a suit made out of woman's skin that he would put on to transform himself into his mother, because he had an obsession for being like his mother. Out of the womb you came, and then you try to get back into the womb, that kind of stuff. He was absolutely insane, people. He started creating all kinds of things. All of the dishes that he used were made out of female skulls. That had the top of the skull had been taken off. It had been hollowed out and polished to a pristine sheen, and he used those as cereal bowls, soup bowls. He reupholstered furniture in human skin. He made a belt out of human nipples that he wore, as well as his full mammary suit that transformed his upper level into a female. He also made a skirt out of skin that came from the lower half of human bodies, as well as he took a collection of female vulvas, which female private parts, and he would also put those in his pants to pretend he was a woman. Let's get back to some form of sanity here. So he lived this way for years after his mom's death. It was finally about 1950 he started venturing back into the town in public, not just skulking around local funeral homes. And he started frequenting the bar owned by Mary Hogan, who, if you're watching on video, is pictured here to the first set of pictures here. Is Mary Hogan. Mary Hogan was a larger woman. She was plump. She was rambunctious. She was kind of masculine in her air, in that she was a business owner. She was a widow that basically made it on her own by opening the most popular bar in town. And it was frequented by the hunters and the farmers, and they would come in there and have a few drinks and get boisterous, and she would gamble with them. And you know, she was the barmaid. She would gamble with them. She would cuss. She cussed like a sailor. She was very anti-Augusta. She was the exact opposite of Augusta in her attitude and what she did. And locals would say that Ed got a bizarre obsession and fascination with her. He would often come in and spend hours talking with her at the bar, drinking, learning all about her. He seemed to have a fixation on this older woman. She was in her 50s at the time. And he seemed to have a real fascination. December 8th, 1954, the bar remained closed. There was no one there. A few of the farmers and hunters came in for their nightly poker game, saw that the door was locked. They thought nothing else of it. However, a few days later, one of the farmers decided it was very unusual for the bar to remain closed that long. So they actually broke in through the front door and found the bar completely pristine, as it normally would be, except for a few spots of blood on the floor, and Mary Hogan was nowhere to be found. The police came in, they kind of looked around, they didn't see any obvious signs of foul play, even with the blood on the floor. It was a bar frequented by some rough and tumble kind of guys, so they figured it might have been remnants from a bar fight. No one really thought anything about it. Mary Hogan didn't really have a whole lot of family to speak of, so I guess there wasn't a lot of people looking for her. So she just kind of disappeared, and people wondered if she had just skulked out in the middle of the night, or if something foul play had actually happened to her. Ed Gein still frequented town. He went to other establishments in the town. He would still joke around with people. People would often wonder where Mary was. And Ed Gein would literally say in a joking fashion, "I got her over at my place." And people would be, "Oh yeah, Ed. Oh yeah, you got her over at your place. Yeah, yeah." You know, no one really believed him. I mean, they thought he was joking around. He had become one of the guys, you know, from hanging around the bar. So no one investigated. No one really, there was a cursory investigation. Nothing ever came of it. Fast forward to 1957. Ed started another fascination with another 50-year-old kind of robust woman's business owner by the name of Bernice Worden. She owned the local hardware store where a lot of the farmers and truckers and everybody would go in to buy things to fix up around the house or the trucks. And again, like Mary, she was very boisterous. She would kid around with them. Everybody loved her. And Ed started to hang around and talk with her just like he had with Mary. No one really thought a lot about it. Her son, Frank, who was a deputy sheriff in the town, didn't really like Ed, but I mean, his mom hung out with a lot of robust characters because of the type of business she owned. So, he couldn't really tell her not to associate with Ed, but he kind of kept his eye on Ed. November 16th, 1957, Frank entered his mom's store to say hello to her when he started his shift, and he found the cash register open, signs of a scuffle, and blood, and a huge blood spot on the floor. He immediately called his fellow sheriff's deputies in and launched a full investigation. Frank was immediately suspicious of Ed Gein. Later that same day, that same night, he and another deputy went out to the Gein farm just to take a look around. Now, the Gein farm was excruciatingly dark because there still wasn't electricity in the barn or the shed or any of those places. It had only been put in the house right up around the time of Augusta's death because she needed electricity. They needed electricity for Ed to be able to take care of her. So it was very primitive in its appearance. It was also starting to become dilapidated, kind of nasty. So they just kind of went for a look around, and they stayed away from the house thinking that Ed might be home. So they saw his Plymouth in the driveway, so they just kind of stayed away. They went to the storage shed just to take a look around because it was far enough away from the house they didn't think they would be seen. They went inside with a flashlight. Frank Worden saw the body of his mother hanging upside down from a rafters, just like a deer's body would be, head missing, a drainage bucket under her head. His mother had been murdered and was being gutted like a deer. Immediately, they called for backup, and they swarmed the house. Upon entering the house, they were immediately stifled by the stench in the house. It smelled like death, is what Frank said in later reports. After taking Ed into custody, they started to investigate, and in places like the refrigerator, the trash cans, storage bins, sealed up rooms, they found the following: whole human bones and bone fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin, a human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedpost, female skulls made into eating bowls, and more bowls made from human skulls, a corset of a female torso made from skin, made from the shoulders to the waist that Ed would put on to pretend to be his mother, leggings made from human skin to make his legs appear more feminine, masks made from the skin of female heads, a face mask made from the skin of Mary Hogan. That murder was solved. And a skull near it in a box, later determined through dental records and other things to be that of Mary Hogan. Bernice Worden's head in a burlap sack. Bernice Worden's heart in a plastic bag on the pot-bellied stove. 9 of the 15 vulvas in a bag. A young girl's dress in the vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old. A belt made from female human nipples. 4 noses. A pair of lips on a window shade drawstring. A lampshade made from the skin of a human face. And fingernails from female fingers. And what they had determined was that Ed had a fascination with being a woman and wanted women around him and wanted to absorb their essence, this kind of weird stuff. And so he turned his obsession with women into macabre art. I just want you to know, I know there was some difference in the names there. Bernice Woodard was her name. Her son had a different last name because of a remarriage. So the names in some of the research that I did were kind of interchangeable between Bernice and Frank Woodard, Bernice and Frank Worden. So I just wanted to specify why. When I take research, I really don't alter it. I just put it in there as is, and then I source it below. So I don't want anybody to think that I made errors there. There was just some discrepancies in what their names were. So it was after this investigation, not long, about a month, that Frank Worden killed himself. And it was later noted that he was a victim of Ed Gein, the same as his mother was, because what he found absolutely drove him insane. So, very sad end there. Over the next few months and years, Ed Gein was held in the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Wisconsin. He was spoken to by many different psychologists and counselors, where they started to unravel this macabre story. And that's where it all came out, that after his mother's death, he started visiting graveyards, taking the skins of larger females, because his mother had been a larger female,
14.
to create a suit and create a way for him to become his mother. He absolutely wanted to become his mother. It was in November 21st, 1957 that he was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, because they had clear confession from him on Bernice's murder. They also had a confession about Mary's, but they decided, because of lack of money, not to pursue a conviction in Mary's trial, because, you know, they were expecting him to be sentenced to death. So a death sentence is a death sentence, and they figured there was no need to pursue a second conviction. So they went after him specifically for Bernice's murder. 1957, he was charged with that. Finally, over 11 years later, after being incarcerated at the State Mental Hospital, November 14th, 1968, he was found not guilty by means of insanity, but that did not mean he was cut loose. He was committed for life back to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. And that's where he remained the rest of his life, by all accounts, a model patient. He volunteered. He helped give other patients their medication. He was, by all accounts, considered a very gentle, genuine kind of prisoner/patient that was very easy to get along with and well liked within the facility. Go figure. As to his property, there were plans to auction it off March 1958 to help pay some of the costs of the trial and reimburse some of the victims' families, as well as those that had been dug up, to kind of repair that damage. But 10 days before it was supposed to be auctioned on March 30th, 1958, on March 20th, it mysteriously burned down. So everybody suspected arson, but again, we're talking about the 1950s. Police investigation wasn't that advanced. His Plymouth that he used to transport bodies back and forth, as well as to carry the freshly murdered bodies of his victims, were sold to a sideshow operator who kept it for the next 15 or 20 years, charging people 25 cents to look at it. Gein himself died due to respiratory failure as a result of lung cancer on July 26, 1984. He was 77. Here is his grave. He's buried in between his parents near Plainview in Wisconsin. As you can see, for those of you that can see it on video, it is chipped. That's because people still come up to the graveyard and take pieces of it as souvenirs. And that's the very creepy story of Ed Gein. I think you can see why he was the inspiration for many movie villains and many horror movie murderers. Very definitely crazy. It's one of the most interesting and unusual stories in American crime, and I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely, you can Google this stuff. It's out there. There are a lot of pictures of the creepy creations that were found in his house. I chose not to show them here, but you can easily find them. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Let people know. I really appreciate it. Down below, if you're on YouTube or BitChute, you will see areas to maybe tip me if you like. You can tip me through Cash App, PayPal, Patreon. Any little bit helps. It helps me upgrade my equipment, because right now I'm using funds from my day job to make these videos. I love doing them. I'll never stop doing them, but every little bit helps, especially since true crime is so heavily demonetized on YouTube. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Keto Comic out.